Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I talk to you about my winter sowing process. So let's go. It is early August and well, you can see there are a ton of milk jugs surrounding me. Inside many of those milk jugs are perennial seedlings that need to be pricked out and either potted up or put out in my landscape. I figured I'd take you along today while I'm potting up my seedlings and just talk to you about the overall process of what is winter sowing, why do you winter sow, and what can you winter sow. It's supposed to be a rainy day today. I could be working in the garden, but I figured this is a perfect project to be doing, especially when it's downpouring. So I'm going to grab some milk jugs and then follow me and let's head into my barn where we're going to pot up some of these seedlings. Be sure to stay until the end of this video where I'll give you a tour of all the plants that are in these milk jugs just so you can see what's here and how the plants are looking. Before I begin, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you for watching my videos, for subscribing, for liking, for making comments. I really do appreciate your support. I love hearing from you. So thank you again for everything you do to help me with my channel. Also, I have a playlist that includes any video I've made having to do with the winter sowing process. I'll be sure to add a link to that playlist down in the description below. The first plant we're going to start with are ruffled near white daylilies. I'm using recycled pots, and what I'm doing is I am potting up all of my winter sown seedlings. So I've been winter sowing for a number of years now, and I have to admit it, I am hooked. I absolutely love it. It is such an easy process, and it's a great way to start a ton of different plants. This is an old milk jug container that's a number of years old. I will not be reusing it. I will be throwing it away. But if it was in good condition, I would reuse it. What I'm doing with these seedlings is I'm just basically taking them apart. I'm pulling them apart like this, and you can see that they have a really great root system to them. All of the seedlings I'm going to show you today would definitely be much bigger had I taken them out of their milk jugs and put them either in the landscape or potted them up. But I haven't gotten around to that project until now, and that is okay. The seedlings still look great, and they're going to put on growth and be ready to put on a great show for next year. Winter sowing, if I had to explain it to anyone, is a very simple, easy way of starting seeds outdoors. And it can be annuals, it can be perennials, it can be vegetables, herbs. And what's really nice about it is, even though it's not 100% hands-off, it's a way to start plants in a controlled fashion using some sort of a container that can hold soil or dirt. It's great if you don't have space indoors to start seeds, and it's a very cheap way to do this. You don't need any sort of special LED or grow lights. You really don't have to baby the plants initially. It's very hands-off to start with. And then eventually you do need to give the plants a little bit of care, but not a ton compared to starting seedlings indoors. But with that said, for me personally, I use the winter sowing process to start all of my perennials, and it frees up a lot of room indoors for me to start a lot of my vegetables as well as my annual flowers indoors. You can use any container you want. I love to use milk jugs. I have experimented with other containers in the past, and I found that the milk jugs work the best for me. And we do drink quite a bit of milk when my kids are home from college, but when they're not home, I have been able to get a bunch of milk jugs from Starbucks. So you can always ask a local restaurant or a coffee shop if you can have some of their milk jugs. The big thing is, no matter what you use for your container, make sure that it allows light to come in. So some other containers you can use for winter sowing could be like a rotisserie chicken. A lot of times you can buy those at like Costco or Sam's Club. You can use a soda bottle. So be creative. There's lots of different options out there. So you need some sort of a container that can hold soil. You need soil. You don't want to use a seed starting mix. You want to be able to use something a little bit more heftier than a seed starting mix. So like a potting mix is a good option. I do like to make my own potting mix, and I'll put a link to that video down in the description below in case you're interested. I like to make my own potting mix for a couple of reasons. I can control what's in there, but also it's a lot cheaper for me to make my own potting mix in bulk than it is to buy it. You need seeds. So again, it can be perennials, annual flowers, herbs, vegetables, whatever. You can buy your seeds or you can collect your own seeds. I really like to collect my own seeds when possible, but not every seed that I plant is from seeds that I collected, but a majority of them really are. And I love doing that. And I also, again, any of these videos that I've created that are related, I will be sure to put down in the description below. But I have lots of videos that show you how to collect your own seeds. So that's why a lot of times on my milk jugs, it's not going to have a specific name to the plant. It might just say white obedient plant or near white ruffled daylily. For example, these daylilies I got from my friend Linda. She has a backyard plant nursery and she hybridizes daylilies. And she was sweet enough to let me collect some of the seeds off of her hybridized daylilies. And I can't wait to see what these look like. When you winter sow perennial seeds or start perennial seeds indoors, or if the seeds drop outside, just know that the plant may not bloom for you for at least 2, maybe even 3 years. So it does require patience if you're going to start plants from seed, especially perennials. But it is such a cheap way to garden, in my opinion. You can really save a lot of money with this process, and you can have so many plants. And this video is not going to go fully over like how to create these little tiny greenhouses. Feel free to watch the video that I created that shows you that process. Just make sure no matter what you're using for your container that you have good drainage. You want to make sure that the water can drain out from the bottom. 1 milk jug complete. So the other thing that I want to point out is I am potting up all of my seedlings. The reason I'm doing that is I start so many plants from seed using this process. I don't know where they're all going to go. I just know that I want a lot of plants, and I have a plant nursery in my yard, and it's a holding bed basically for me for all of my plants like these ones, as well as for plants that I divide and sell as part of my nursery. I sell the plants off of Facebook Marketplace. People find my ad that way. It's worked out really well. So I am potting up all of my plants, but you don't have to. You can definitely take your plants and put them out in your landscape. And these plants were very easy for me to pull apart. But I will show you some plants that are a little bit harder because they're so heavily packed in a milk jug. And I'll show you my process for how I deal with that. Before I go on, the next thing I want to do is make sure I add a label into each of these pots. Learn from my mistakes. In the past, when I've had so many seedlings, I would just be like, you know what, I'm just going to let them be. I'm not going to label them. And when they bloom, I'll see what color they are. But because I have a plant nursery, people want to know, well, what color are these plants going to be? Even if they're not buying them, they're just curious. And I'm curious too. So one of my goals for this year is to be better about labeling each of my pots. It's very tedious, but it'll be worth it in the end. And I already have one label to start with because it was inside of my milk jug. For each of my milk jugs, I typically had a tag inside that said what the plants were inside of each of the milk jugs, but I also had the names of the plants on the tape that was used on the outside of the milk jugs. I'm just using, these are like those Venetian blinds, and we just had some old ones kicking around, but you can also find them on Facebook Marketplace. I like to use those for my labels rather than always buying them. It's a nice, pretty free way to have tags for your pots. In case you're wondering what I'm using to pot up my seedlings, I'm using compost that I get locally from a transfer station close to my house. It's free to me, but you can use whatever you want. You can even use potting mix. I wouldn't use seed starting mix. You want something, again, that's a little bit heftier than that. Okay, we're going to tackle this one next. So this is a foxglove, and it's a pale peach color. And I typically did put down the dates that I had sown these seeds. It really doesn't matter, but in case you're wondering, I sowed them around January. So it's August right now, and I can tell you for sure that all the seedlings in this milk jug would be this big had I pricked them out months ago and potted them up. but that's okay. Again, these will take off and they will be fine. So what I like to do, because I mean, there's so many seedlings in here, is I literally am just going to dump it right in my hand, just like that. I want to show you close up what this looks like. Look at all those seedlings. There's even a little weed in here, it's a little oak tree, I think. And then you have some big, huge seedlings. By the way, this milk jug is still in pretty good shape. So what I will do with it is I will just take some water and I'm just going to rinse it out. If you wanted to, you could totally disinfect your milk jugs. I've never done that and I've never had a problem with my seedlings, but you absolutely could do that. But I am all about recycling and reusing when possible. So what I'm going to do is I will end up rinsing all the milk jugs out like this one. I'll let them dry and then I'll store them for the winter months. So in a case like this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very carefully start trying to tease apart the seedlings in here. And I'm going to go after all the big ones first. There are a couple of schools of thought. Some people like to do what's called the hunk of chunk method, which would be like to take a whole bunch of these type of seedlings this big, maybe 7, 8, 10 of them, and pot them up. I don't do that. I take each individual seedling and I pot them up. I know it's very tedious, but I do enjoy that process. And in the end, each of the plants will be nice and large rather than having small seedlings competing against each other. But you can definitely do that. You can take a bunch of them and just do what's called the hunk of chunk method and plant them in your landscape. So that's one large seedling that can get pot up. There are a ton of little seedlings in there. When it comes to those really, really teeny tiny ones, I could do the hunk of chunk with these ones because they're so small. And then later on, maybe 1 month from now, even as they put on a little bit of size, I can come back in if I want to, and I can pot those up into their individual pots. I'm trying to be as gentle as possible. When it comes to sowing your seeds, some people say just to sow 3 or 4 seeds in a milk jug. I can see why you would want to do that. I don't do that. I like to just sow a whole bunch of seeds in a pot, especially when it came to these foxglove seeds. These were seeds that I had collected, and there were so many seeds that were tiny. So it was just easier for me to just plant a whole bunch of seeds in that milk jug. So did I plant a lot of foxglove seeds in that milk jug? Absolutely. I probably didn't need to be that heavy-handed with the seeds. In hindsight, I could have probably only planted 25% of the amount of seeds that I had planted there, or even less than that. But that's okay. The great thing is the seeds were free to me. I didn't spend any time on it really. And if all I wanted to do was save 10 of these plants and throw out the rest, I could. But if you know me really well that I'm not going to do that. So my strategy for a pot like that will be to pot up these larger size and medium size seedlings into their own pots. And then all the little teeny tiny ones, I will do the hunk of chunk method, but I'm going to be putting them again in pots. And my goal is over the next month or so, as those little seedlings put on a little bit of growth, I will revisit those pots and I will then divide those plants into their own pots. Isn't that a nice looking seedling though? Most of the foxgloves are biennial, so they will bloom next year. So by next year, this plant will be huge. My goal with a plant this big is I know that this plant will outgrow this pot next spring. So either late summer or early spring, I'll be taking this plant and I'll either be potting it up into a bigger pot because I might be selling it, or I'll be putting it out in my landscape. I fertilized these plants maybe only a few times this season. I gave them a little bit of liquid Miracle Grow. So what I will do is I will be giving them Miracle Grow again because they definitely need it. I can tell based on their color that they need fertilizer at this point. I didn't have any foxglove this year to sell as part of my backyard plant nursery, but I did have this plant last year. And I sold out of it completely to the point that I didn't even put one plant in my landscape. So I won't be making that mistake again. I definitely need to have this plant in my own landscape. The best time to winter sow is right after the winter solstice. And the first plant that you want to winter sow, if you are going to winter sow right after the winter solstice, would be the perennial seeds. You don't want to be starting things like vegetables or your annual flowers during the dead of the winter, especially here where I live in New Hampshire Zone 5B. Because let's say, for example, I started something like marigolds during the middle of winter. The seeds would be dormant. They're not going to do anything. But eventually, as the weather starts to warm up, those seeds will sprout. But we still are going to be having cold temperatures. My average last frost date is usually middle to end of May. So you can imagine if a very tender plant like a marigold was to sprout, but then we had freezing temperatures, even though they're in these little tiny milk jugs, which are like a mini greenhouse, those seedlings will die. They're not going to survive. So you want to be starting your plants accordingly based on your zone, where you live, your temperatures. So for me, I would be starting my perennial seedlings anytime after the winter solstice, because the plants are not going to germinate. They're just going to sit there and be dormant, and they'll germinate when their conditions are right. I have not winter sown annual flowers or vegetables because I like to grow those indoors under my LED shop lights. But you can definitely do that. You just have to make sure you're looking at the timing of everything according to your zone. Some seedlings might be lost during this process. That's okay. It happens. You'll notice with the milk jugs that they have the top part to them, and they have basically like a hinge that you can open and close. And that works out really well during those days when it was really cold, like the late winter, early spring months, as the plants were just starting to wake up. Now, these are all perennials, so I wasn't too concerned about any of that. But especially if you have something that's tender that shouldn't take a frost, then you want to make sure that you're closing your greenhouses on those days. And then those days that it's really, really hot outside, you want to make sure you're opening up your little mini greenhouses. So there is a little bit of work involved later on in the process, but again, it's so worth the effort. But with perennials, it's so low maintenance. These perennials have just been sitting in their milk jugs. The only thing I've had to do, they all were opened up, but I had to give them water because we didn't have a lot of rain for many months. So I did make sure that I gave them plenty of water. I'm doing this process on a day that it's not very sunny, it's cool. So when you are taking out your seedlings, and if you're going to put them in your landscape or you're going to pot them up, you want to make sure you're not doing it on a very, very hot day, because these seedlings need to get acclimated to their new environment. One tray is done so far. Look how great they look. You know what's funny about my backyard plant nursery that I have is that what motivated me to even start it was the winter sowing process. A couple of years ago, when I first started the winter sowing, I ended up with so many plants, and I didn't know what to do with all of them. I just knew that they couldn't fit in my landscape. And so that's why I ended up creating a backyard plant nursery, was a place to hold my plants, but also a place where I could sell plants. And I'm so glad I got into that. It's been so much fun. One thing that I've learned about having a backyard plant nursery is you need plants. And you can divide your own plants, and that's definitely what I do. But I know that some people that have backyard plant nurseries, based on videos that I'm watching on YouTube, they buy in plugs to start, their inventory, and that costs money. So I am trying to avoid that. I haven't had to do that yet. And instead of buying in plugs, these are kind of like plugs when you think about it. I had mentioned earlier that a lot of these plants were started from seeds that I collect myself. And you can definitely do the same thing. You can collect the seeds of plants, annuals or perennials, from your own landscape, but you can also collect them from other people's yards, from neighbors, friends, family members, parks, lots of different places. I love dividing plants from my yard to create more plants. That's definitely the quickest, easiest way to increase your stock in plants, is by dividing your own plants. But there are many times when you see a plant somewhere, let's say it's at a park, and you don't have that plant in your landscape and you want that plant. And if the plant that you saw is going to seed, you can just collect the seeds and then you can sow those seeds a couple of different ways. But the winter sowing process for me is the easiest way. So it's almost like the hunt every year to go looking around for different perennials that I don't have and just checking to see if they've gone to seed. And it's a learning process. I don't know every single plant that's out there and what to look for when it comes to it going to seed. But that's what's great about the internet is you can look that up and research it so that you know what you're looking for in terms of collecting the seeds. And it's like the best feeling to collect those seeds and put them in something like a milk jug, and then that spring to see plants germinate. I don't know. I get a kick out of it. I think it's wonderful. When people come to my house to buy plants from me from my plant nursery and they see the milk jugs, it's always a big question like, what is that? And, the whole winter sowing process actually has been around for a long time, but still, so many people have never heard of it. And I love just educating about it because I think it's such a great thing, such a great way to start plants. So, like so low cost and quite hands off. And one of the questions that I get asked is, well, how does it work? And the best way that I can explain it to anyone, especially when it comes to like winter sowing perennials, is when you think of a plant, pick coneflower, echinacea, and it's a perennial here where I live. And at the end of the season, when it's done flowering, it goes to seed. And the birds come along and they eat the seeds, or the wind blows, or whatever. And then the seeds drop to the ground. And then you might notice the next season, like in the spring, that you have little baby plants all around at the base of your main coneflower plant. And what happened was those seeds dropped to the ground and then they overwintered. The whole winter process happened. So the plants got what's called that cold stratification period that they need. A lot of plants need it, not every plant, but a lot of perennials need it. They get that cold period that they need in order to germinate. And then what happens is the plants, when they're ready, when it's their time and they're ready, they're going to germinate. And all different plants germinate at different times. And nothing special was done. The seeds just dropped to the ground. They weren't really covered by anything. Maybe they were covered by snow, but I'm just saying that no one came and intervened with the seeds. No one came and put them into the soil or in the ground. They just basically sat on top of the soil. And they froze, they thawed, they froze. The snow came, it melted, all that fun stuff happens. And then the seeds germinate. And you end up with these baby plants everywhere. Well, the winter sowing process is very similar to that. So, like when it comes to a lot of the perennials that I winter sow, I research each seed because I'm collecting the seeds a lot of times, so I don't have instructions. I'll research it, but generally, a lot of the perennials don't need to be covered with soil. And if they do, then I would cover it in the milk jug. But then the milk jug gets placed outside during the winter months, and I don't need to water them. They are frozen. It's completely cold here where I live in the winter, and snow comes, and the milk jugs are frozen all winter long. And then as spring approaches and the freeze thaw cycle begins, those seeds will germinate and wake up when they're ready. So it's the same exact process, but what I really love about it is that I'm controlling where all those seeds are. They're all in this little tiny milk jug. Rather than taking the seeds and sprinkling them all around my yard, I have a little bit more control. Could I take those seeds and sprinkle them out in the yard and they'll germinate in the spring? Absolutely. You can definitely do that if you don't want to go through this whole hassle. When it comes to handling these little seedlings, it's very similar to how you would handle seedlings indoors if you were pricking them out. A lot of times you want to handle them by their leaves. You don't want to handle them by their stem, because if you break the stem, then there's a good chance the plant is no good and won't survive. But if you break off one leaf, the plant is okay with that because there's other leaves on the plant. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're working with seedlings, be it the winter sowing process or seedlings indoors, that you're handling. In case you're wondering, when it comes to all those milk jugs, did I get germination in every single milk jug? Nope. That's okay. It was very little effort on my part to do that, to put the seeds in there. And why something didn't germinate, I'm not quite sure. I could have used old seeds, for example. That might be one reason why there was no germination. Or why was there low germination? Well, there might have been low germination because I only planted, let's say, 3 or 4 seeds. I definitely did not heavily plant every single milk jug. For example, that ruffled daylily that we looked at earlier, I didn't have many seeds of that. So I only planted whatever seeds I had on hand. I don't know how many it was, but it might have only been 4 seeds. But either way, I didn't have a ton of seeds. So that's why the germination rate was so low, for example, in that milk jug. I have this container that I had cherry tomatoes in, and I'm just going to put the soil inside of here, and whatever small seedlings are left over there, I'm just going to put them in this container. Notice there are drainage holes in the bottom of it, and that's all I'm going to do for now with these little teeny tiny seedlings. And see this right here? This is an example of that hunk of chunk method. If you wanted to take this and just put this in your landscape, or even cut it in half and put this piece in the landscape somewhere else, this piece in the landscape, you could do that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to put it inside that container there. And these plants are just going to keep growing on in that container. And I'm very happy that we pricked out a lot of seedlings already, the bigger ones. So now these little ones have a little bit more of a chance. And what I plan on doing is just checking on these every so often. And if I feel like they're putting on some growth, at that point, I'll go ahead and I'll start pricking out more seedlings. But they're just so small. I mean, I could come in and take 1 or 2 out at this point still. But I have so many other bigger seedlings I want to tackle. So I'm okay with just putting these back in a container like this. And I like this container because it's quite large. It's almost similar to the milk jug, to be honest with you. But I had a lot of these containers on hand, so I figured I might as well use them. So I'm just taking a chunk at a time, and I'm just trying the best I can to place them in this container. And it really is going to be survival of the fittest for these little seedlings. And remember, these seeds were free to me, and it was very little effort on my part. I didn't have to baby them under grow lights or anything. So if I can get a good amount of seedlings out of this still, I would be happy. So those have been thinned out pretty well. They're still very close to each other, but there's more room in here for these guys to grow. I'm going to do the same thing like I did here with these guys here, and that way it'll be survival of the fittest. Now keep in mind, most of my milk jugs were not this heavily packed, but I definitely did that with my foxglove. And I have a few more milk jugs that are just like this with the foxglove seeds. If you've ever grown foxglove from seed, then you know that their seeds are super tiny. And that's tray number 2. Better late than never. Survival of the fittest, little baby foxglove seedlings. I use duct tape on the outside of my milk jugs, and I noticed that a lot of them were falling off, which is why you want to always label the inside of your container or your milk jugs in case the duct tape falls off. Next up, we have a Siberian iris hybrid, and I collected these seeds from my friend Linda, who hybridizes iris. So look how cute and little those are. We're going to get each of those individually potted up. So I thought it would be great to make this video this time of year to not only give you an update on what the plants look like that I winter sowed, but also to encourage you to try this method. It's August, and like I said, I start this around January. So now is the time to collect your supplies. You want to make sure you're getting whatever container that you're going to use for your winter sowing, and definitely do some research on the topic. Look it up on the internet. Get inspired by other people and the containers that they're using. I know that some people like to use totes, and some people have had success with that. Some people have not had success with using a tote where you have a clear tote and you put pots inside of it. I've never used that method. Like I said, this method works really well for me. I've seen some people use gallon-sized Ziploc bags. So be creative and don't give up. If for whatever reason you try it and it didn't work, I highly suggest try again. but maybe try a different method. These little iris are just the most adorable little things. I don't know their color, so we'll have to wait a few years to find out what colors they are, but it'll be worth the wait. I'm putting one plant in each of these pots. By next year, this plant will get bigger. And then I'm going to have to probably pot it up. I really like to keep things in my nursery until I can see them blooming and see what color they are. Once I see how pretty they are with their color, at that time, that's when I shop my own yard and I can then take it from my nursery and put it somewhere in my landscape. And with these pots, I like to pack it down because the soil does settle and I want to make sure that the soil is pretty much to the top because it will settle over the winter months as well. So other than thinking about your containers that you're going to use, you want seeds also. You need to collect your seeds. And even though I collect a lot of my own seeds by, harvesting them from plants, I too will be looking on the internet and I'll shop around. Maybe I'll find an interesting perennial that I really, really just want to have and I can buy the seeds. I don't really have any website that I recommend in terms of buying seeds, but I'm definitely going to check out Swallowtail Gardens. I think they have a lot of nice perennial seeds. I'll see if rareseeds.com has any perennial seeds that are interesting to me. I know I had a lot of luck with their coneflowers. I had some really beautiful coneflowers this year that I winter sowed a couple of years ago, and this was the first year that they bloomed. And I'll look around and see if there's any other sites out there. If you've ever winter sown, I want to hear from you. I'd love to know, how did you do? What kind of container did you use? And then in terms of seeds, if you did buy the seeds, is there a website that you recommend? Because that would really help me out, but it might help anyone else out that's reading the comments. So for each of these perennials, I mentioned earlier about giving them fertilizer. It is August. I could do Miracle Grow. I could give them a slow release fertilizer, but I could also not give them anything because I really want them to put their energy into creating stronger roots. But at this point, they will be just healthier and happier just to be out of those milk jugs and be in their own little individual containers. So technically, I really don't even have to give them anything because I'm not growing them so that their leaves are lush and green. I'm just growing them on so that they can just continue getting stronger roots. And whenever you're teasing apart your plants, you just want to be really careful. I was thinking of doing, I might not do this, so it's just a thought. I was thinking of doing some sort of a workshop, locally, throw it out there maybe on Marketplace for this winter, where I provide the milk jugs, I provide the soil, I provide the seeds, and I can have people come here and we can winter sow together. I don't know. It's just something I'm tossing around. I thought that might be something fun to do. Another tray is complete. I will make sure I add labels to all of these, but I'm going to keep on going because we're making good progress. I mentioned earlier that these are pots that are used that I'm just recycling. And you can get used pots from a lot of different places. And even if you don't have a backyard plant nursery, it's still nice to have pots on hand. If you want to create a little nursery or a holding bed for yourself because you don't know where you want to put certain plants that you've divided in your yard or that you've winter sown or that you started indoors under lights like perennials or whatever, definitely look on Facebook Marketplace because a lot of times people are just giving away their pots for free or they're selling them at a cheap price. Also, a lot of times garden centers have a recycling area where you can drop off pots, but you can also pick up pots. And that's where I get a lot of my pots from. So, you have these little greenhouses with the hinges, and you don't ever want to keep them closed when it's a really hot day. You're going to fry your plants. So there's always that fine balance of keeping them closed when it's a very cold night or a cold day and you have tender plants in there that might die if they get too cold. But then there's also the keeping it closed for too many days. And if it's too hot out, it's going to be really hot in that little mini greenhouse. So just be mindful of that. That's the part that's not hands-on, is as the plants start growing. you do need to take care of your plants. You need to make sure that they're watered. For many months, I don't have to water these because once we get out of winter, they're, and they're thawing out after being frozen, they're wet for a long time. But eventually, they're no longer that wet or saturated. And especially if we're not getting a lot of rain, then that's a problem. And speaking of the rain and the moisture, when it comes to the container that you use, notice that the tops of the milk jugs are open. And that's the reason they're open, is to allow snow to get in them, to allow rain to get in them. So whatever you use for your container, you are going to want to make sure that it has an opening on the top that allows for moisture to come in. But that's all covered in my video that I made on how to winter sow. And even though I'm doing this in the beginning of August, I probably could have started doing this even as early as May or June. I know that some of these perennials sprouted very quickly and early on, some sprouted later. And optimally, I would have been tackling the milk jugs one by one as plants were emerging. But that's all right. But that's something that, I would advise that you try to do if you can, if you have the time. Some of the milk jugs had no life in them forever. And then eventually, when the plants were ready, they germinated, which is kind of fun. So don't ever give up on a milk jug, by the way, or a container, whatever you winter sow in. Don't give up too quickly because, like I mentioned earlier, that plant or that seed is going to germinate when it's ready. And some seeds germinate super fast, some seeds germinate much slower. It just depends on the seed that you've sown. So be mindful of that. Don't give up too quickly and throw your dirt out. Some of the most interesting plants that I've ever winter sown, be it seeds that I collected or seeds that I bought, would include the primrose. That is a really fun plant. I love it in the springtime when I see it in the garden centers. So I would say a primrose, when the fact that I was able to get those to germinate and they just look so cute when they came up, that was a fun one. And those were seeds that I bought. And then Jacob's ladder. I collected the seeds off my Jacob's ladder plant and sowed those. And those, just the leaf structure was so cool when those came up. I love those. Grape hyacinth or muscari. And I mean, that one's a crazy one to even want to winter sow. But I was like, well, what the heck? Why not? Because if you have grape hyacinth in your yard, then you know that, like daffodils, those bulbs will multiply very vigorously. Like, you don't have to collect the seeds of them. But I was offered the seeds by my friend Linda because, I mean, I have the plant in my yard, but I had already cut the blossoms back, so I didn't have any plants that had gone to seed, but she did. And she said, hey, Vita, just for fun, do you want to try to grow these from seed? And I'm like, heck yeah, why not? I was up for the challenge. And surely enough, those plants germinated and they were the cutest, sweetest little things. I mean, it was just like blades of grass. And I looked in there today and I don't see any life in there. And I was a little sad, but actually, I have a feeling that there's probably little tiny bulbs in that milk jug. So I'm going to have to check that. I can't imagine the plants died. I think that they just went dormant. So keep that in mind too when you're winter sowing. You might have a certain plant that germinated, looked great, but then it went dormant. So I should have little tiny bulbs in those milk jugs. But then there are some plants that I've winter sown before that I'm like, I don't know if I'll winter sow them again. And one of them is columbine. The first year, just like any other perennial, the first year they're just like teeny tiny, they don't do anything. And then the second year they bloomed. But it's also a plant that I have a lot of in my yard. And I can easily get little seedlings and dig them up if I want to. However, if there is a columbine that I don't have that someone else has, or I've seen the seed somewhere and I really just want to have that plant, then yes, then I will winter sow that plant. In my yard, I have a lot of perennials and I've collected seeds from them. I've winter sown them, but I am getting closer to the point of deciding, do I really want to winter sow plants that I have a lot of in my yard? And I don't think so. Columbine was one of them, and other ones like dianthus. I have quite a few dianthus plants in my yard, especially like a white colored one as well as a pink colored one. I wouldn't collect the seeds and winter sow that because I have so many of that plant in my yard. And if I needed to divide them and add them to my plant nursery, then that's what I'm going to do rather than winter sow those plants. So I'm getting to a point where I've done it. It was fun, but do I really want to keep collecting the seeds of a plant that I have so much of in my yard? Probably not. I'd much rather propagate it through division. Sometimes I want to experiment with winter sowing, just like I did with that muscari. There might be a plant in someone's yard and they're like, hey, Beta, do you want the seeds from it? And maybe we're not quite sure if the seeds are really the seeds of the plant or are they even going to grow. You have not much to lose by trying to collect the seeds of a plant and trying it out in a milk jug. Worst case, nothing comes up. But the roots on these plants are actually pretty good for how little they are. A number of you had asked me to make a video talking about winter sowing. So I'm hoping that I've answered a lot of the questions that you might have had, but I'm sure that I didn't think of everything. So I would love it if you have any other questions about winter sowing, if you can drop them down below, and I'll definitely get to them and answer them for you. And if you want to give it a try, I definitely recommend that you check out my playlist because my playlist shows how to winter sow, the materials that you need. I have some tours of winter sowing from that I basically where I show you, I open up milk jugs and show you what's in the different milk jugs. And speaking of tour, I'm going to end this video with a tour of all the other plants that I have in my milk jugs, just so you can see what they look like. But remember, they would be much larger had I pricked them out earlier in the season. But as long as there's life in there, I'm a happy girl. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the tour. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening. These are the foxglove that we're going to allow to get larger. They are spaced out a little bit more, so they should do better. And then I'll end up pricking them out, putting them up into bigger pots. These are the larger size foxglove that we pricked out and put in their own pots. And they are going to totally take off now. These are all the hybrid iris. Each tray holds 10 pots, so there's over 30 of those plants, plus a couple at the end there. And then we have the white obedient plant. Everything will turn a darker green color now that they've been potted up. Just give it a few weeks. I had labeled this as either agastache or salvia. You'll notice in here, that is a pansy, that's a pansy, but that looks to be a plant that's meant to be in here, as well as this one. What do you think, agastache or salvia? Right next door, here's another one of either agastache or salvia, as well as a little pansy. This is anise hyssop, as well as an oak tree. Over here we have more anise hyssop. Now notice the difference as you go from more sun to a little less sun. And then this over here is anise hyssop as well, but it was slightly covered like this. They're alive, but they should be a lot bigger. But that's okay. They'll get potted up and they'll take off. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I have a number of these. This is the Artemisia silver brocade, and there are quite a few pots of these. I am so happy about this milk jug here. This is cardinal flower, and it's the red color cardinal flower. And some more red cardinal flower. Well, I did enjoy these when they were blooming inside of the milk jug, and I never got to show you, but they are the orange California poppy. In here is another oak tree, but also the oriental poppy. We have a few red-orange oriental poppies. See this right here? This is a tall red dianthus. And, well, yeah, it needs to come out of its milk jug. And there you can see the base of that plant, and it looks like there are some other plants in there as well. In here are a couple of orange echinacea, some more orange echinacea, some more orange echinacea. You add all of these up, it ends up being a good amount. This is a mix of some purple and white echinacea. I wrote down for this one purple salvia. Well, whatever it is, there's a ton of that. In here are a ton of echinacea, and it says that it's the shorter variety pink color. Some more short pink echinacea. Okay, this is ridiculous. I have a number of milk jugs of the short pink echinacea. It's not ridiculous. It's actually great, but I won't bother and show you all of them. But you can see they're looking really good. They just, like everything else, they just need to be potted up. I have a ton of white balloon flower. And when I'm showing you all of these, just know that I might have multiple milk jugs of it. So you can imagine it's going to take me a while to get to all of these when it comes to pricking them out. This says that this is a scabiosa. I'm not quite sure, but whatever it is, there are 2 of them in this pot. A lot of sea holly, and one thing I wanted to mention that I had forgotten to earlier is that certain plants that have a big taproot, it's better to start them from seed. So I'm actually really glad that I started more sea holly from seed because that was very popular in my plant nursery. In fact, I fully sold out of this plant. So I have a lot here for next year. False sunflower or heliopsis. Foxglove, either pink or cream color. We have Shasta daisies. So tiny. Foxglove. They're like a pale peach color. Oh my goodness, what was I thinking? More foxglove. This is either a pink color or a cream color. Some sort of pink mallow. And then this mallow desperately wants to come out. Mallow. We have Sweet William. Many, many milk jugs of Sweet William. So there's some of the grape hyacinth in there, but again, I think that the bulbs are down below in the soil. And I have a number of milk jugs of them. A lot of milk jugs of the dwarf balloon flower, blue color. Okay, I wrote down Veronica or purple salvia. Clearly, I at one point could not tell the difference. I can now, but when I used to collect these seeds, and these seeds are a few years old, I did not know the difference. So whatever they are, they're going to get potted up. Have you ever heard of teasel? Well, these are teasel. This was one where I wrote perennial, question mark, question mark. I didn't know what it is. I still don't know what it is, but it's something. Yay, I am so excited about this one. This is turtlehead or shalone, and I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Look how small they are. I need to baby these because I really want this plant. If you have a lot of lamb's ear and you feel it's invasive, well, I want it to be invasive in my yard. I want more lamb's ear, and I have a number of milk jugs of lamb's ear. I'm so excited. I collected these seeds, and I didn't buy them. And look, I have a lot. I have probably 6 milk jugs of them. Very exciting. We have Ampsonia. It's a blue color. I collected these seeds, so I have no idea if it's the tall or the short. Siberian iris hybrid, and possibly a weed. You know what they say, one is better than none, and that is a silver leaf yellow colored yarrow. This I'm very excited about. This is blackberry lily, and I collected those seeds from my friend Linda's house, so I can't wait to have this in my landscape. Last but not least, yellow colored baptisia, which is so exciting because I have the purple colored one. I don't have the yellow colored one. I collected the seeds from a garden center. So now I just need to grow on these plants, and hopefully they should bloom for me in 2 or 3 years.